You're listening to the Decidedly podcast with Sanger Smith and Sean Smith. Our mission is to help business owners like you defeat bad decision-making so you can improve your health, wealth, and relationships. We do this by digging deep into the stories and expertise of our guests and distilling their knowledge into actionable wisdom for you to carry into your life and business. If you're new to the show, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. If you prefer to watch this week's episode, head on over to YouTube for the full video. Now, let's get into this week's episode and defeat bad decision-making in your life and business.
A few weeks ago, either right after or right before my wife and I got married, my mom gave us a gift. And my wife told me since that it was the most meaningful gift she's ever gotten in her life. It was this artwork. It's like three-dimensional artwork that sort of looks like a wreath. It was like little circles of paper that were glued all in different sizes in a circle to kind of look like a wreath. And they're all the different pieces of paper are different colors. And they have different patterns on them. And as from standing, 10 feet away, it looks really pretty. As we walked closer to it, we could realize that every single little piece of paper was something relevant to our marriage. It was either a picture of us, it was a picture of something that was important to us. One of them was like the lyrics to our first song or first dance at our wedding. Some of them were pictures of things that we liked do together. And so it was like just all about us. And we were overcome with love because my mom created this thing for us. She made it. Like she put so much effort into it. It's not something that she could have just bought. It's not something that she could have whipped together in an afternoon. Like who knows how long she spent working on this. And it really has changed, I think, the way that I approach, serving others and maybe providing is the wrong word, but displaying gratitude and love. There's something so meaningful in doing something for others. And I'm sure that for her, she really enjoyed the effort and the work that it took to make that, especially when she saw how happy we were to have gotten it. Our guest today knows all about service, and his life has been all about service. Wasn't always easy though, because John O'Leary was the victim of a horrific house fire at 9 years old. He was given a 1% chance of survival. And instead of allowing himself to become a victim, he decided to fight. His mom pushed him to become a fighter. And eventually he blossomed into the best version of himself that he could have become. And since then, he's said yes at every opportunity to serve others and use his story as a gift to allow others to overcome the challenges that they're facing in their own life. He's written books about his experience, and one of his books, On Fire, is going to become a feature film later next year. It's an amazing story from someone who has a lot of love, a lot of service, a lot of wisdom. So whether you've been through a major challenge or you think the challenges that you've faced are simply the most difficult things that you've faced, there's a lot for you to learn from our conversation with John O'Leary. I hope you stick around. I hope you learn something. And I hope you think more about how you can be of service to other people. My name is Sanger Smith, and this is Decidedly. Yeah, thanks for being here. I have to imagine that there's nothing that really is difficult for you at this point in life.
Well, you know what, Sanger? Hello. First of all, I watched your video about what your podcast is, and if you were going to be difficult, I would have figured it out during that recording. So that the way you show up and what you're ultimately trying to put into the world it's not venomous. So, man, I'm like, this isn't difficult. This is fun. So I'm excited for the conversation.
It's not venomous. Maybe there was a time in my life when I was younger that I had a different attitude, and we all go through a journey of reformation. You have a really magnificent journey that's inspired so many people. And as I was reading about it, like this started when you were 9, but it's not a moment in time. It's a lifelong process that I'm interested to hear about. But every time I would read, like, this happened, this was a 9-year-old, like, could I have imagined myself at that age saying this or doing this? And what I really took away is that, like, there's something about the human spirit that we probably underestimate in children. My sister has a son. He's not even 1 year old. Like, every now and then he'll do something and it just hits me, like, he's just a human being. Like, he's not this separate category of baby or child. He's a human being who does not have as many life experiences as I have. And you had a very transformative experience very early. You're very comfortable talking about that day and that moment. What I was interested in reading in is, like, first of all, how did playing with matches in the garage, how did that cross your mind?
Well, I know one of the things you help your clients and families do is not make bad decisions. And unfortunately, sometimes the way we learn not to make bad decisions is to make them, and then hopefully not make them a second or third or 11th time. With something like this, though, sometimes it's one and done. Sometimes you get one mistake in life and you don't get an opportunity to make a second one. And I almost fell into that category. I was 9. I grew up in the Midwest, in St. Louis, Missouri. A father who was a small business owner, a mother who was a teacher. And when she wasn't teaching, she was raising 6 kids and a couple dogs. We had a great life. And one of my neighborhood friends, he was 11, I was 9, was playing with fire and gasoline. And I remember watching him and a couple of his buddies and just thinking, like, dude, it's the most remarkable thing in the world. These kids would pour a little bit of fluid onto a sidewalk. They would strike a match, stand back a couple feet, throw it on top, and boom, it would just light. And I just assumed if they can do it, come on, man, so can I. So on a Saturday morning with my mom and dad gone, with a couple of my sisters out, the house was mine. I walked into this garage and bent over a can of gasoline, 5 gallons. That's 42 pounds. And the plan was just to pour a little bit of gas on top of the flame like I'd seen others do. And before the liquid came out, the fumes, like, you can almost hear it in your mind, pulled it in. There was this moment of silence and then this massive explosion. So we call it an inflection point, but it's a moment that changed my life.
Yeah, and it's hard to blame a 9-year-old for that. Did you go through any period of blaming yourself?
Yeah, so candidly, Ben, not so much for what I did to me. I blame myself in part for some of the struggles my family has had secondarily. When a person goes through something as horrific as this, it's not only the person who goes through the horrific struggle. It's for sure the siblings who were home that day of the explosion. For sure, what they saw and heard and experienced, that shapes their life. It's for sure the parents who go into the emergency room and have to figure out, how do we respond with this child who has no clothes and no skin on his body right now? And what do we do on day 2 and day 3 and month 4? How do you struggle forward with the child you love?
Yeah.
My grandparents, my neighbors, the kids who were playing with fire and gasoline, like, all these people, man, were affected profoundly by my decision. So although I don't blame anyone other than myself for what I did to myself, it's a mistake. We all make them. I certainly struggled with the weight of, how do I alleviate the struggle from others? And if your next question is, well, what do you do with that? Man, you can walk through life a victim to everything done to you, everything you've done to yourself, or every perceived injustice in your world for the rest of your life. And for the most part, no one will ever blame you. And maybe more than that, they'll celebrate your victimhood.
Yeah.
Like we live in a society now that almost like champions the wrongs done against us as individuals or as people. And for a while, I fit into that category. I've been alleviated of that, though. I am no longer chained to my mistakes. Part of that is my faith. I'm a Christian believer, and I believe that it's already been washed away. Like all my mistakes have been washed away. So that's alleviating. But I also recognize that the mistakes I made also led us collectively perfectly to where we are now. We are united as one as a family. I'm for my mom and dad today, like completely for them. And so are my siblings. They are for me. I'm for them. So this bond that we have as a family is unbreakable. And part of that union is the challenge and the tragedy we face together. We have a strong faith, my parents, but also there's 6 kids. We still have a strong faith in a world that seems to push faith away these days. And my siblings have credited that moment where they had to lean into their faith as a moment that they never forgot what they received once they leaned in. So there were many struggles, and then I'll be quiet, many struggles that came out of the fire. But I think the blessings far outweigh them.
And that's somewhat the essence of faith is, when you've got to put your trust in something or someone, and you have to lean in like you were talking about. For some people, maybe they've never had something so severe happen in or anything traumatic, right? Maybe they hear a story like yours and they're like, well, geez, I've never had this like real test that I've had to face. Well, for someone like that, like faith is a uniquely different challenge for them to find, well, how do I put my trust when my life's been like actually pretty sweet overall? That seems like a lot of responsibility as a kid to shoulder the burden and the blame. And like you've already recognized, you shouldn't be burdened with that blame. But was that something that occurred to you, the impact that it had on others? Was that something that occurred to you as a child, or was that over the ensuing years?
No, over the years. And when I write, so I've written a couple books now, and we do a podcast. There's a movie coming out about our life, and I speak about it every 2 or 3 days, like around the country. So like I share this story a lot, but almost always through the perspective of the heroes who showed up. And I think because you brought up the idea of, John, I don't know if everybody can even like relate with being burned on 100% of their body or relate with a storm like that in their life. Many of us, it's been pretty sweet. It's been pretty sweet. And that's mostly true, but I think everybody's been through storms. So what I decided to do years ago as a content delivery person, someone who speaks and writes and travels on this, is to share the story from the perspective of the caregiver. Whether that's a nurse, because maybe that's a role you understand, a parent, that's a role many of us understand, a sibling, volunteers in the community, on and on and on. Because I think when you can place yourself in their shoes, then you can say, okay, now I understand my role, not only in this kid's story, that 9-year-old, but also in my story today as I step forward financially, in my business, in my family, in society, in the struggles and in the joy of life. So
yeah,
that's how I try to set it up. As far as, John, did you know as a kid what you were putting others through? Of course not. I think for the most part, we are so self-centered, rightly so, man. You got to worry about yourself for a while until at some point in your life. And for me, maybe a turning point was kids, my first kid and then second kid. And then slowly by the third and fourth one, I started slowly figuring out life's not about me. When I started to recognize even my marriage wasn't about me. Like that was a turning point. When I had an opportunity to become a caretaker for my dad, when the man who changed your diapers, you get to change his, you recognize maybe it's not about you. Maybe the whole world is wrong when they keep telling you at every commencement address, it is about you, man, go shine. It might be a lie. And so what I've developed and discovered on the journey is the joy of trying to build a life for others, and then the ripple effect of what happens in your life when you do it just right.
Yeah, the world certainly pushes that victimhood or the embrace of victimhood because it's so much easier. Yeah, it's a lot easier for me to make excuses, particularly if I'm not having the life that I want. It's easy for me to blame something that happened to me. Well, the reason that I can't do that is because this other thing that was outside my control, it happened to me, and therefore, I might as well not try. And it's also easier to cope with my own failings to the extent that I may have caused them. Nothing that I could have done differently. It's really hard to look myself in the mirror and go, man, this bad thing that I don't like, this result that I'm not happy with, I could have prevented it, or I could have improved it if only I had done this differently. And so I think a lot of people naturally fall into that mindset, and then we encourage others, because when someone is overcoming a challenge that's bigger than the one that I faced and failed, that makes it hard for me to accept that it was impossible for me to overcome my challenge. If I'm looking at someone across who, oh man, the reason for my failure is my parents got divorced.
Yeah.
Well, when I see this guy who's succeeding in life and his parents died in a fiery automobile crash, that makes it really difficult. So I'd rather it be the case that everybody kind of accepts their own victimhood. And I think that's what causes the world to sort of encourage that.
Yeah. And there's a scene when this part of the story comes up. I frequently bring also the viewer, the audience, the podcast, whatever it might be, back to the scene in Jaws. It's when they're, this 1980 movie where they're out on the boat trying to catch this fish, and they're rolling up their sleeves, and each of the guys are talking about their scars. And ultimately they're trying to prove to the other how tough they are and how big, the bite was, or whatever it might have been. And I always remind folks, like, dude, I'm not here to roll up my sleeves and show you my woundedness, to talk about the amputations on the hands or anything else. When I hear someone else say, John, my parents were divorced, all I can say is, dude, I can't imagine. And I really can't, because my parents are still together 57 years in. When someone says, John, my story sounds like yours, but my prom date didn't show up and she said she would. Like, I would never diminish that. So my perspective is never diminish the struggle other people's face, other scars they may have incurred. But also, those don't have to permanently negatively define the life you and we can have going forward. So like, both those things can be true, where you can love people who seemingly have not been through a difficult journey and like embrace the struggles they faced. And at the same time, remind them, and there's still more for you in your life. Like, I can walk with you toward that. We can go there together. So it's not either or, it's a yes and.
No matter what that journey is or how difficult others may perceive it, the worst thing that ever happened to you is the worst thing that ever happened to you. And it might be you got stood up at prom. It might be your parents got divorced. It might be the house fire when you were 9. Whatever it is, that worst thing that happened to you, the biggest dragon you had to slay was still the biggest dragon that you ever had to slay. And that you can't, you're right. You shouldn't diminish others or compare or anything. It's not helpful. We all have something, and giving others and ourselves maybe the grace of, hey, this is what I've had to overcome. It's not about how hard it was. It's about, did I step up and did I overcome it? Your parents being married for 57 years. That's so beautiful. A lot of families, when particularly a child dies or goes through something very traumatic, parents' likelihood for divorce seems to go up. What do you think, what kept your parents together and so committed to one another through that?
I mean, 57 years ago, as babies, they stood on an altar and they said, for better and for worse, we're richer and poor. And they went through these commitments and they meant it. And I know life changes and things come up and people change, and sometimes negatively. And this is not a conversation around abuse or like even marriage and divorce. It's only a conversation about my parents.
Yeah.
So they made this commitment 57 years ago. And at that point, my dad was a recent law school grad. My mother had just graduated college, just accepted a teaching job. This is before they had 6 kids, before they had a miscarriage, before they had a fire where their son almost died, where their other kids were scarred emotionally. This is before they lost their house 15 years later to a second fire. This is before Parkinson's disease diagnosis stole my dad's health, his ability to speak, drive, and earn before they were saved up. This is before their life has been through fire after fire after fire after fire. But they made a decision when life laid out in front of them that we were going to do this thing together. And now on the back end of their journey, I was with my mom and dad last night. They came to my house for dinner. They're still committed. And so I can't speak to you and to your dad and to others who are listening to our conversation around what might work for them. What I can tell you worked for my mom and dad is they put God first. Right behind that, they lean into their spouse. They put that person next. Then they chose their relationship. And then behind the scenes, they love their kids. Now, you might be thinking, parents in the house, like, dude, that's how selfish. What I can tell you is one of their kids, I don't know any kid in the world that had a better childhood than I had. And I don't know any young adult today, I'm 47, who have better parents than I still have. So although they put some things in front of me, one of the things they put in front of me was their marriage and their faith and one another and dating and love. And if it was a decision between dad choosing John or his wife, all day long, dude, he's choosing his wife. Like it was a united front, man. It was a united front, and it still is. So they made that commitment. One thing, my wife, I've been married now 21 years.
Yeah.
The thing I'm trying to do for and with her is be as committed today as I was in November of 21 years ago when I said the words I do. And one thing I did, Sanger, years ago, and I felt like, man, I was losing that drive a little bit, or maybe the better word is intentionality, is I started tracking the beauty in her world. And by that, I mean, like, what was she doing each day that it was, again, reminding me why I fell in love with her in the first place. As you trend forward in life, it's easy to take for granted air or freedom or marriage or health or whatever it is that you just wake up with. And I recognized 15, 16 years into our marriage, I was doing it, man. I was taking my wife, Beth, for granted. So I started a journal on January 1, and it just said, Dear Beth. And I acknowledged what was going on behind the scenes. So I said, so this year I'm committed to tracking your beauty. And on January 1, I looked for something she did that just was awesome, uniquely her, and I wrote it down. And then I did that again on January 2 and 3, and I never told her I was doing this. And on Christmas, so 360 days into the year, she opens, I give the worst presents, man. I'm like the guy who gives lawnmowers. All right. So yeah. I never give a good present, but this year I finally gave her a good one. And it was 360 days of doing life together, where it was her husband acknowledging how incredible she is. A little love letter every day, just calling out her beauty, calling out the meals she made for someone struggling, calling out the times where she does things for neighbors where she doesn't even tell anyone, things she does for me or the kids or my parents or hers. Things, in other words, that go unnoticed if you don't notice them. And I tracked it, I wrote it, I told her I loved her, and I gave it to her. And in our marriage, to that point, that was the best year of our marriage, not because she changed, but because I did. And so all of that to say, I think what you focus on grows. So I spent a year tracking Best Beauty and found it. And my mom and dad have spent a lifetime tracking the beauty of each other, and they find it.
That is such a meaningful gift. I was fortunate enough to have a similar dynamic with my parents. They made it like really clear that they were, one, committed to the idea of marriage, and then also committed to each other before us. Whenever I was little and I started to notice, say, friends at school, their parents are getting divorced and things like that, I would ask my parents, Mom and Dad, like, are y'all going to get divorced? And it only took me asking them maybe 3 or 4 times, and I got the same answer. They said, we will never get divorced. First time I was like, okay, that's reassuring. Second time I'm like, okay, yeah, that's good. I remember them saying that. And by the 3rd or 4th time, I was like, oh, they mean it. Like, they're not just trying to alleviate my concern or fear, and they mean it. And so no matter how bad it gets, I always knew they're going to stick with each other. I remember one time, I was like at high school, we're all driving home from church, me, my sisters, and my parents. And my sister poses the hypothetical question to my dad. She goes, okay, Dad, imagine all four of us were like hanging from a cliff. Okay. And you can save Mom or you can save all three of your kids. Who do you save? And without even thinking about it, he goes, I would save Mom, obviously. It's like, that was a stupid question. And she goes, what? What the heck? There's three of us. These are your children. You're supposed to love us. You're supposed to protect us. And he was like, she's the only one I chose. And I thought that was so funny. It's like, I picked her. I made a commitment to her. You were a product of that commitment. And obviously, it's a silly hypothetical, but it speaks to what you're talking about with your parents of putting each other first. Your mom, when you were struggling, she asked you what seemed to be such a profound question for a child to answer. Whether you were in the hospital or whatever, she asked you essentially, do you want to die?
Right.
Walk me through that moment and what were you experiencing and feeling when she forced you to confront that?
Right. So this goes back to the day I was burned. It was January 17th, 1987. I was 9. My brother Jim saved my life. I came out of the fire, on fire, into the house. And through his heroic actions, he burned himself in the process. He's okay today, but he burned himself, put out the fire on me, carried me outside, called 911. And the lifesaver of the year for the state of Missouri was the 17-year-old ordinary kid who just stepped forward in a mighty way and changed my life. So that ambulance shows up, rushed me down the street to the hospital. My dad was the first one there. He met me in love, and it just was like so tender, so sweet what he said to me, like, I love you and there's nothing you can do about it. And, because at that point, I was so concerned about how he might react to the fire, like me causing it and me burning down his house. And
you were still approaching it from that childlike blame. Yeah,
for sure. I still do, man. Like I'm amazed at his wisdom and his unconditional love. So he came in with love. And I think that's important because that started to change my heart for the whole thing. My mother came in shortly behind my dad and she takes my hand. My hand was severely burned. Eventually they'd have to amputate my fingers. So she takes my hand, pats my bald head, and she says, I love you. And that's when I said, Mom, knock it off with the love. Am I going to die? And I assumed she was going to say, you're not going to die, baby. We'll get you out of here. But instead, this heroic woman says, baby, do you want to die? Your choice, not mine. And I looked back a little bit surprised and said, Mom, no, I don't want to die. I want to live. And then her response was, good. Then look at me, babe. Take the hand of God. You walk the journey with him, but you fight. You do your part. You fight like you never fought before. Your daddy and I will be with you, but fight. And on that morning, Sanger, it's important to recognize this, man. I'd never heard of a bandage change or a skin graft or gangrene or whatever else we were about to go through. All we knew on day one, the fight was on. We were going to take the hand of God. We were going to step forward in faith. We were going to do it in love as a family. But we were going to audaciously fight forward, believing that better things could still lie ahead. So you asked the question, what did your mom say? Am I going to die? And out of context, it's like, oh, man, that's rough. But what she recognized, and I think what all leaders, I know you speak to an audience of leaders, not just business owners and financial leaders, family leaders, at some point, they've got to make the decision for themselves. And my mother put this in front of me on that morning, recognizing that she can only lead the horse so far. At some point, I've got to decide my participation level, my willingness to fight on.
Yeah, and there's something so jarring about reading that question that she posed to you, because it's like, I'm expecting her to say what you expected to hear, which is, nope, it's going to be okay.
Right.
And I'm assuming there's something within her that recognizes that's not an appropriate, that's not an appropriate response here, because that is not going to be what gets us through this. And at that point, did she know the prognosis from the doctors? Because, they gave you a very low likelihood of success.
Right. That's true. So the way they figure out burned survival today in 2024 is that they take the percentage of the body burned. So for me, it's 100. They add age, and you've got mortality. So in 2024, that's the math, 109% likelihood of death. Back in 1987, when a kid presents with 87% third-degree burns and 100% total burned surface, there really is no chance. The doctor that day told my mother that John has less than 1% chance of surviving the first night, and that those odds will never go up in time. Wow. And that was his gentle way of this, his name was Vachiavajan, this wonderful man, of trying to compassionately let my mother know, dream and pray for the best, but absolutely, in this case, expect the worst, because that's what you're going to get. But what she, what he did not recognize is her faithfulness, our fortune of having such an awesome community around us, this little boy's desire to fight, his ability to work miracles through his hands, and the staff that worked with him. So it was a collective effort that led to this miraculous result. And I wonder if it would have happened had my mom not said, almost like moment one, baby, do your part. Take the hand of God, walk with him, but fight. And
that to me seems to be the difference between faith and hope. Not to say that hope is something we should avoid, but you had faith in so far as you were accepting your role in the journey. You're accepting your part in the story, right? Like Abraham had faith because he acted upon the call of God. And we ought to have hope. But hope alone is not going to get us the promises that God is offering.
I have a buddy who works with the not-for-profit in Haiti, and his expression is always pray, always, but move your feet. The idea is, faith, but dude, move your feet, fight. Like you use agency, man, to move on.
Yeah, that's incredible. So how long were you in the hospital before you were able to begin transition back to, a normal life, if you could call it that?
Well, and just to put it in context, here we are 4 decades almost later. I have such a normal life. I'm so blessed, dude. Healthy. Yeah. Crush my kids in basketball every day after school. So at least I claim to, although they're all better than I am now at around the world in horse. So I have a normal life today. How long did it take to get to that normal life? It took 4.5 months in hospital. It took dozens of surgeries. It took a couple years of therapy following to fully reacclimate, to figure out how to hold a fork again, and how to walk again, and how to run again, and how to unzip a backpack again, and everything else that you have to do in life. It also took an angry, evil mother who insisted early on, I do everything for myself. And I mean that in the most loving, tender way. Like my mother, one of my favorite stories about my mom is she's about a month and a half after I came home, she called a piano teacher, and she had this woman, her name was Mrs. Bartello, come out to her house, and I'm in a wheelchair. I'm on morphine. I'm still wrapped in bandages. This woman comes into her house. They roll me away from the kitchen table, and I'm like, Mom, where are you taking me? They roll me into a living room. They lock the brakes. I'm in front of the piano bench, wrapped with gauze, missing my fingers. This piano teacher puts her arms around me and says, John, this will be hard, but we can do it together. And with that, she strapped a pin to my fingerless right hand, 3 rubber bands held it on. And this little dude with no fingers at age 9 on morphine is now jamming the piano with a pen the entire time, thinking like, dude, what's wrong with my mom? Could she be any worse? And the only day that was worse than that one is the following, when the teacher came back. And then she came back, and this goes on week after week, month after month for 5 years. And I share that story because it wasn't about the piano. I think many parents these days parent up for the next recital. Like that's really the goal. Can we get the kid ready for the recital? My mom couldn't care less about music or recitals. So the piano class wasn't about that. It was about potential. It was about promise. It was about recognizing that just because life beats you down doesn't mean you give up. It doesn't mean you can't do mighty things still. So my mother indeed taught me how to play the piano. It took 5 years. But more than that, she taught me that I could do very difficult things in life. So that's a crazy story. We had a neighbor who ran a small farm when I was in high school. And that neighbor was looking for farmhands. And dude, like, I'm skinny. I don't have like everything working against me, but my mother signed me up.
The opposite of the ideal farmhand.
It's like, and the opposite of what you want for your child. Barely survived the burn. His skin is soft and easily bruised, and you got to keep it out of the sun. And she puts me on a freaking tractor to bale hay and work my tail off all summer long. But I haven't worked since. Like, that was the hardest job I ever had, because I was doing things that I couldn't have fathomed before that summer I could have done. So parenting today frequently is about just plowing down everything, man, to make it easy, to call the coach and say, you know, I noticed you didn't play Jimmy as much today. Can we talk about that? Like, my mother wasn't up for that at all. She wanted it hard. She wanted me to fail forward, and she wanted to be there with me, to kind of bend down next to me, love me forward, pick me back up, pat me on the bottom, and say, let's keep moving forward. Let's just keep moving forward and see what we can do.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful gift that she gave you. Like the suffering that she allowed you to experience and in some way manufactured so that you could grow in the virtue necessary to become who she knew you could become.
Right.
Yeah, that's analogous to any suffering that we experience in life. It's a gift from God that we're allowed to experience some suffering so that we can overcome that suffering and grow in virtue. Because without it, you'll be weak, you'll be feeble, you will not become who you could become if you don't have to overcome any challenges. And that's so admirable of her to allow you to do that, because and to have the foresight, because I think that there's an instinct there on the part of a parent. I'm not a father yet, but it seems so instinctual I want to protect my child from every bad thing that could possibly happen. And so when I see the parents who are, complaining to their coach about playing time, or going to talk to the school about the teacher that's a little bit rude to their child, like, I get it. I understand where they're coming from. But to, the faith that we share, right? Like, what makes the story of Mary so compelling to me is that she knew from the beginning the level of suffering her child would endure, and she said yes to that. And like, that's the essence of parenthood, is to say, I am going to let my child suffer in ways that they may not deserve.
And in all the recorded written accounts of that, she was there looking up at the suffering.
Yeah.
So it's an unimaginable cross to bear, to not only know that the suffering is coming, but to witness it. Like that is love embodied. And I'm glad you brought up that example.
Yeah. To not only allow it to happen, to witness it, because that's what's best for the child. And in the case of Christ, what's best for everyone. But man, so do you still play the piano?
I do. And at live events years ago, like this is back in like 2016.
Do you strap? I mean, do you still do like the pin technique?
Oh, no, man. So my fingers are all like about a 1/2 inch long. So like that's about how much they were able to save. And that is enough for me to hit chords. I can get 3 to 4 keys at a time now. So there's no like very little flexibility, but it's enough that I can make it seem kind of legit. So years ago, I was in Las Vegas. A woman had read that John plays the piano at home, which is true. But she said, John, will you play for my family today? Okay, so her family was 27,000 at the MGM Grand. And I'm like, oh, ma'am, I don't think that's a good idea. She goes, I think it's a great idea. And dude, I'm like, all right, what song do you want to hear? Like years ago, I learned like just say yes, just serve people. I said, yeah, ma'am, I'll do it. So I said, what song would you like? And she said, well, John, what's your mother's favorite? So I'm like, well, her favorite's Amazing Grace. So she goes, well, play that. So man, like at a secular conference in Vegas, in front of 27,000 people from more than 100 countries. It was a big event. This fingerless dude gets up there and just jams Amazing Grace. And it was the longest standing ovation I've ever received. And I only say that because this thing that I am imperfect at, playing the piano, hitting the wrong keys, hitting the wrong chords all the time, became the thing that was most celebrated. So later on, I'm like, well, maybe I'll do it again. And I did. And now we play like U2 and Garth Brooks and Coldplay and whatever the meeting organizers want. And it's not to show like, wow, isn't he gifted? He can speak and play the piano. What a guy. First of all, it's about leadership and stewardship, and a teacher refusing pay. I know many of our listeners are like financially driven. Good for you. But this teacher refused pay for 5 years to guide a person forward to recognize the potential of their life. And that is a payment that you cannot put a dollar sign behind. What's the value of that? I have no idea how to measure it, but she changed my life. And so part of it is that, to just recognize your life can profoundly influence the life of someone else's. That's awesome. But also recognizing that, and you have underutilized talents that you've kept too close to the vest. And it may be playing the piano, it may be cooking, it may be serving, it may be raking. We're in fall now. It may be raking leaves for the older folks in your neighborhood. It could be a million things that you could do well as you watch Monday Night Football. And so the encouragement is occasionally think outside of the reflection in the mirror and do something for someone else. Watch what happens in both of your lives.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. I didn't realize that she refused to pay. There's those opportunities when they come, we are able to step up and offer ourselves as service. God, you got to take them. She took that. And that's amazing. You put yourself in a situation every day where you're reliving this experience and you're reliving this suffering. How does that impact the way that you parent your children? Right? Your mother was a great example of allowing you to experience hardship to become who you could be. How does that change how you parent?
So, my wife and I are wild about each other. We parent slightly differently. She's a little more protective than I am, and I'm a little bit more cavalier than she. And I think the blended approach works well for us. But as you even heard in my awkward stumble out of the box, I give my kids a lot of rope. I want them to get lost. I want them to be confused. I want them to do poorly in sports and in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And I want them to know that they have a safe place to come home to hug them, to talk with them afterwards, to grieve with them afterwards, to figure out what went right and wrong and to do better the following time. And so I like bruises, because I think you recognize how far you can go when you get a little bit bruised up along the journey. And to my right, as you and I are talking, there's a picture hanging up. There's a whole bunch of pictures as you see all over my office. But on this side, it's people that I look up to. Some of them historic, some of them just spoken about in parables. But one of them in a parable is the prodigal father. So in this oil painting, it's Rembrandt, one of his last paintings, where he shows the prodigal father just pulling this boy in who is so busted, so damaged, so sinful. And yet the dad is just, come on home, baby, come on. And I want to always be the embodiment of that. Just this dad who sends his kids out to do mighty things and is steadfast enough in that love that when they trip and when they fail and when they disappoint and they will do all those things, that he is also loving enough that he's like, dude, the front door's open. Come on home. Come on home. Yeah.
That's such an aspirational view of fatherhood. When I was hearing you talk, what I remembered was a moment where my dad took me skiing for the first time. I was like maybe 15 or 16, and I get the skis on, I can barely like even stand up on flat ground. I have no idea how to ski. And so he immediately like starts pushing himself over to the ski lift. This was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we get there like really early. There's nobody on the mountain. Go over to the ski lift. He kind of like walks me through how to get on the ski lift. And I'm like, hey, Dad, like you still haven't told me how to ski. He goes, yeah. So remember how we water ski sometimes like once a year back home? I was like, yeah. He goes, yeah, you pick like your toes up to turn. I go, yeah. He goes, it's the opposite on snow skiing. I go, okay, that's it? And he was like, yeah. And so then we get there and I don't know what I was expecting. You know, I'm expecting like a practice area or something. No, obviously there's not. We get off the lift and he's like, all right, let's go down. I go, well, what if I can't ski? How do I get back down? He goes, well, it's downhill. Like gravity will take you, so you'll be okay. And I stumbled and busted myself the whole way down that mountain. And when we got home, my mom was so annoyed. It was like she knew that's what he would have done. Like that was so typical of him to have taught me to ski that way. But I was like, no, Mom. Like it was the best because by the end of the trip, I was skiing more difficult routes than him. Like it was so fun. I'm so glad that I fell down that mountain because it forced me to learn.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah. How difficult was it for you early on being comfortable like reliving this story?
So I'll answer it by starting with where we are now. It's awkward for me now because I recognize the audience, whether it's an audience of one or an audience of tens of thousands, whatever the number is, are in the midst of their own storms. And in your work, when a family sits with you, you recognize every single person who comes in and you shut the door and you start unpacking finances, they're in the middle of something. Like every single family is going through something right now. And if that's true for the elite families that you serve,
yeah,
gosh, man, let's just acknowledge that the world is hard. It is imperfect. It is broken. So when I stand up there on a stage with my nice little sport coat on and the microphone's just right, my heart just aches, man, for the people who are struggling. And I know that's almost everybody. So that's what I feel today. And I hope in sharing this story that it gives them hope to journey forward in theirs. I hope it gives them power to overcome the adversity they face right now. I hope it reminds them of the power of faith in their journey and leaning into others and being a hand to draw someone forward up into the possibility of their lives. So those are some of the things I hope they receive today. In the early days, John, how hard was it to share? I went 20 years or so without going back into a hospital because it just reminded me of what I went through, and I'm not going to go through that again. Although most kids go to counselors or burn camps after they come out, I went to neither of those things because why relive the bad? If someone was to ask me what happened to my hands or arms or scars, my face is unburned, 3rd degree, so it looks normal. But if I have short sleeves on or shorts on, people would frequently ask, and I would give them a quick answer, but then pivot the attention back to something else, or mask with humor or alcohol. So for the majority of my life, I just ignored it. In other words, now it's my livelihood and my passion. Those are sometimes two different things. In my case, it's one, undivided. So I'm fortunate to do work that is not work anymore. When that began to change for me is I was 28, and I'll be as short as I can in this story, but 28, back row of a church service. The pastor is preaching on the gift of talents. And says, if you think you only have one talent, listen to me. Your life is a precious, priceless gift, and you have one job. One job. Say yes to being used for good. So I'm like, all right. I wrote it down that night. Say yes to being used for good. 2 days later, Tuesday morning, I'm working construction. This is the gift my mother kept giving me. The ability to do things that it's just stupid, man. Why would I do without fingers work construction? I have no idea. But I'm working construction. I'm 28. I run my own business. And my phone rings and a little girl says, Mr. O'Leary, I heard about what happened to you. Will you share your story at my school? And in any other world, I would have said absolutely not. But 2 days earlier, I was challenged by a pastor to say yes to being used for good. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I practiced this talk. Went in, failed completely in front of a grand total of 3 Girl Scouts. But one of the guys in the room was a dad who was also a Rotarian. And he said, John, I run a Rotary Club. Would you speak at my club? I'm like, dang. So I said, yes. One of those ladies was in Kiwanis. One of those ladies ran a Chamber of Commerce. One of those was also in a separate Chamber of Commerce. In that room was a guy who ran a prison ministry in Kansas. I'm a Missouri guy, but I drove across state lines now. One of them ran a federal prison called Fort Leavenworth. One of the guys in that room, what you're hearing here, business owners, family and friends, it wasn't some unique or innate strategy. It was just this humble desire to say yes. So it grew in time into a really lovely business, but it came from a very humble beginning of saying yes. And when you say yes enough to others, you begin to recognize the scars that you share aren't about you. It's about opening up them to the gift within their scars, within their brokenness. Behind me, I have a bunch of quotes on the wall. There's one from Henry Nouwen. Nouwen wrote, "What is most personal and private is most universal and sacred." So the very things in your marriage that you think, oh, that's only me, or in your addictions that you think are only you, or your brokenness that you think are only you, in reality, are the things that connect you to everybody else. So I recognized probably after about 10 years of sharing this story that it had nothing to do with me. And that was an alleviating gift when it could ultimately be about how do I influence podcast listeners or audiences live or moviegoers eventually on what's possible in their lives.
Wow. Yeah. We have to accept that discomfort to kind of recognize the truth of there's something, the personal is universal, like you're saying. And it is universal because it's so uncomfortable sometimes.
Right.
And you mentioned the movie. How much, that seems like, I'm guessing that's something that you said yes to as well, in the sense of, you didn't start this journey with the Girl Scouts thinking one day this will be a movie.
Of course not. And candidly, if I had, I hope the audiences would run away both from the Girl Scout meeting and the 2,600 meetings that followed and the movie coming up in November 24 or 25. Like if your goal in life is accomplishment solely, if it's like only to cast a brighter light onto oneself.
People can smell that.
Dude, I think in particular, younger generations, you might be able to sell snake oil for a while, but kids pick up on it. And in time, everybody else does as well. So that was never the goal. Years ago, people would ask, do you want to turn it into a movie? And I said, no. Years after that, people said, hey, can I turn this into a movie? And basically I said like, no. And then finally it was actually.
And why were you saying no?
It just seems so self-congratulatory.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, can I, Sanger and Sean, turn your business into a movie? And you're like, that just seems like, no, dude, we're just.
Yeah, I'm not that special. There's probably better movies. Yeah, I would
That's how I
feel
felt.
uncomfortable.
I'm a Missouri guy, man, like humble, hopefully Midwest kid that is trying to serve, but not trying to generate light. I'm trying to reflect it. But this lady that I met in Vegas at that conference where I played Amazing Grace came up in a book line and said, John, have you ever thought about turning this book she held up on fire into a movie? And I said, ma'am, I have not, but others have said it would be a good idea. She said, so she goes, can I try? And you began your question with, John, I bet you had to say yes. And so, yeah, here it comes. I said yes. So we remained in touch. We remained kind of friends tangentially. We met again about a year later. And she said, John, I've raised about $100,000 to get this thing written. I'm like, awesome.
Wow.
So she paid a guy named, well, I won't even tell you, but she paid a guy to write the screenplay. I'll tell you. His name is Gregory Poirier. He's written more than 100 screenplays. He's a successful guy. The screenplay came out and it was beautifully done. So then she started shopping this around to directors, because once you get a director, then things start happening. And then a guy named Sean McNamara, who has directed movies like Spare Parts, A Miracle Season, Soul Surfer. He just did Reagan. So like he's a legit director who likes to bring to life real stories of overcoming. He didn't direct Reagan because he's a Republican. He directed Reagan because he grew up in a dysfunctional home, in almost poverty, had a difficult childhood, had a mother who loved him fiercely, and he overcame adversity after adversity as he moved his way into the White House, knocked down the wall, defeated communism. This is not a small story. So Sean told that story and told it brilliantly. So Sean likes to tell these stories, and he caught the wind of this story and directed it we brought it to life. There's guys like William H. Macy, who portrays a guy named Jack Buck, one of my heroes, a radio announcer in the Midwest. So yeah, man, we said yes again and again and again. And I never imagined Hollywood would come knocking, but we always imagined as we started the journey of impacting lives through our work, that we would say yes to the next right step. And if you can do that intentionally and faithfully in your business, in your marriage, in your finances, in your life, I think you are thinking too small on what can happen in the course of your lifetime. If you just boldly, steadfastly, and faithfully say yes, we can accomplish some mighty things.
Yeah. Sometimes whenever I am working, and this is a much smaller example, but like working with people on sales, how do you get better at sales? I said, well, like fundamentally, if you can just understand what somebody wants and then genuinely help them get it, regardless of how it helps you, then you're going to win. Like you're going to be great at sales. And so sometimes every now and then people will be like, yeah, okay, so like, what do I do so that people know that I'm genuinely like helping? Like, how do I say it? You know, what's the words that I use? What's the structure of it? I'm like, you are, by asking that question, revealing that you don't actually have the genuine motivation. You have to genuinely want to help this person and genuinely detach from how it impacts you. And if you do that, then you're going to find the words. People will recognize that you are being genuine.
It's so hard to do when you're hungry. You know, it becomes easier. This doesn't make it common, but it becomes easier to do as your business or life gets easier. And yet, paradoxically, your life becomes easier the moment you decide to make your life not about yourself.
Yeah.
And so and this is a little, hopefully trying to give a couple takeaways during our time. But when I teach sales or leadership, there's a guy named, the world's greatest salesman. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but he's got this quote: "How do I greet everybody I meet?" So this is the world's greatest salesman. So probably worth taking notes on. And he says, "In silence and to myself, I say, I love you. Though spoken in silence, these words unwrinkle my brow. They shine through my eyes. They bring a smile to my face, and they echo in my voice." And so this idea of sincerely, not outwardly saying I love you, because that might freak out the guy you're trying to sell.
That might be weird.
Product to. But if you can genuinely look into their eyes and quietly say, I love you, all of a sudden you don't need to ask the question, well, how do I ask that question the right way? Like, and what's the phraseology I say again? That stuff matters to a degree, but far more so is the sincerity around how you show up and your heart for them. And people pick up on that, and they want to do work with people who care for them.
Mm-hmm. What's your biggest decision-making tip for business owners?
I mean, we've been whispering about it a lot today. Number one, it's not about you. So that's cool to recognize you're building this thing that has nothing to do ultimately with you. So that's fun. So then it's ultimately, all right, so then what am I doing here? Which means, okay, so how do we create actual shareholder return? How do you create value for something bigger than yourself? That's when mission shows up. That's when purpose shows up and values show up. That's when a vision for the business shows up. We every year generate a vision 5 years downstream of what this could look like, because I think we think too small 12 months out. We think way too big today. Like we think we can get way too much done today. But I think we think way, way too little on what we can accomplish 5 years downstream. So that 5-year vision allows you to imagine big, then you draw back a little bit to 3, then 18 months, then pull forward from there to set really smart goals around it. If you ask me though, one specific takeaway for business owners, surround yourself with people that might take your job. But put in people who are, every one of them is better than you. And as I look around my office, they all work circles around me. I'm the dead weight. We've identified the problem. It is us. Like I know the problem here, man. It's me. But how cool then to be with people who are smarter and more industrious and more committed and more faithful and more loving than you. So that's what we've been trying to hire around us. And because of them, this business has grown in ways that I could have never done it myself.
That is very astute advice. And I think that I'm doing the same thing here at Decidedly. I'm the lowest performer and the most replaceable, and I'm happy if that's the case.
Perfect. Well done.
John O'Leary, thanks for being here. Your book is on fire. Movie is coming next fall. Where else can people find you and connect with the work that you're doing?
So, if you go to the internets, as my dad still calls it, if you go to the internets and you type in www, period, not dot, because we were watching Sebastian Maniscalco last night. I tried to teach his dad how to operate the internet. It was pretty hilarious. But his dad typed in DOT when he said dot. So no, not that. www.johnolearyinspires.com. So it's johnolearyinspires.com. And on that website, you'll find information around our podcast and our social media and our speaking and our books and the forthcoming film. And more than that, you'll find my email. And we're not in the business ultimately of booking speeches or selling books. Like, we're here to walk with people. And it's good work if you can find it, man. So I'm here to serve, and if people need a thing, they can email me anytime.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Sanger.
My takeaway from talking with John is to say yes. Say yes to opportunities when they present themselves. That's the genesis of John's story. Is he said yes to opportunities to pursue something meaningful when it came in front of him. A lot of times we miss these opportunities because we fixate too much on a goal. A goal can help us measure our aim toward a progress that's bigger than the goal itself. But if we focus only on the goal and we exclude other opportunities, then we lose sight of why the goal was there in the first place.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision by subscribing to the show and leaving us a review wherever you're listening. We appreciate the support. It helps business owners like you find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com, on Instagram at decidedlypodcast, or grab a copy of Sanger and Sean's books from the links in the show notes. Finally, we'd like to thank Shelby Peterson of Transcend Media for editing and post-production of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Morgan, your producer, and this is Decidedly.